My stepmom surprised me when I was in the garage. It was a typical Sunday afternoon, much like countless others before it. I had been out in the garage for what felt like hours, engrossed in fixing up my car and losing track of time. My name is Nicholas. Currently, I'm 23 and I live with my father, who recently remarried Pamela, a woman nearly 3 times my age. Pamela, my stepmom, is 61, but you'd never guess it by her appearance or demeanor. She looks much younger than her real age. She radiates vitality and carries herself with an elegance that's impossible to overlook. Little did I know, though, that this seemingly uneventful day would take a turn and become anything but unusual. As I worked on tightening the final bolt of my bike, the faint sound of the door connecting the house to the garage creaked open, breaking the quiet rhythm of my task. At first, I didn't give it much thought. Probably just Dad coming out to check on me or see how far along I was, I told myself casually. But then I heard her voice, soft, yet carrying a certain authority that was impossible to ignore. "Hey, you're spending a lot of time in here," Pamela said as she took a step into the garage. Instinctively, I looked up, and there she was, standing framed in the doorway. She wore a lightweight dress that hugged her figure in a way that was both subtle and undeniably eye-catching. Her blonde hair, styled as immaculately as ever, gleamed under the soft light filtering into the space. What truly caught me off guard, though, were her eyes. There was something different about them that day. A sparkle, a playful glint that I hadn't noticed before. "Just finishing up with the car, Mom," I responded, my voice steady as I wiped the sweat from my brow with the back of my arm. I tried my best not to let my gaze linger, but there was an unmistakable magnetism about her presence. It was as though the entire room shifted slightly in her favor, drawing my attention in a way I couldn't fully explain. "You know," she said, approaching me with a confident stride, the sound of her heels clicking rhythmically against the concrete floor. "I don't usually come down to the garage, but I was genuinely curious about what you were up to today." I chuckled nervously, trying to calm my seemingly slightly embarrassed situation. "Yes, there's really not much to see here. Just a collection of tools and a bit of grease." She smiled, that warm and inviting smile of hers that always seemed to light up the entire room. But today it felt even more intense, almost electric. Leaning casually against the workbench, just a couple of feet away from me, she looked at me thoughtfully. "You've been putting in so much hard work lately. Don't you think you deserve a break?" Her words lingered in the air, creating a weight that seemed to shrink the garage around us, making it feel much smaller than before. I could sense her eyes fixed on me, and for the first time it didn't feel like she was simply my dad's wife. There was something deeper happening, something I couldn't quite articulate or fully understand. "Maybe," I muttered, my voice betraying a slight tremor as I struggled to maintain composure. Turning back to the car, I busied myself with the pretense of tightening a bolt that was already secure, hoping the action would steady my nerves. "You don't have to be shy around me, you know," she said, her tone softer now, almost inviting. The warmth of her voice seemed to close the distance between us. Then I felt her hand rest gently on my shoulder, and every muscle in my body tensed. Her touch was light, almost hesitant, yet it sent an unmistakable shiver rippling through me, as if it carried a meaning I wasn't ready to confront. "You've grown up so much, Nicholas," she murmured, her voice barely audible as her fingers trailed slowly down my arm, leaving a tingling sensation in their wake. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry, as my heart pounded in my chest like a drumbeat I couldn't control. "Pamela, I stammered, my voice faltering, but she silenced me with a simple motion, stepping closer until her body brushed lightly against mine, sending a wave of heat through me. "It's okay," she whispered reassuringly, her tone soft, yet filled with an intensity I couldn't ignore, as her hand moved gently up to rest on my neck, Before I could muster a coherent response, she leaned in and her lips met mine. Wunch. The kiss was gentle at first, testing as if seeking permission, but it quickly deepened, becoming more passionate. Her lips were warm and insistent, igniting a fire in me that made it impossible to think or process the moment. All I knew was that I wasn't pulling away. Her hands moved with deliberate care, sliding up to my chest and then beneath my shirt, her fingers tracing the contours of my muscles with an intimate familiarity. I felt as though I had stepped into a dream, a surreal, intoxicating moment, and a part of me wasn't sure I ever wanted to wake up from it. "Pamela, we shouldn't," I whispered against her lips, my voice trembling with a mixture of hesitation and longing. Her response was a soft, knowing smile, her green eyes locking onto mine with a gaze that seemed to pierce right through me. "Well, not?" she asked, her voice lilting with a teasing edge that made it impossible to look away. "Your dad's gone for the day, and it's just the two of us here." Her fingers played lightly with the hem of my shirt, toying with it in a way that sent shivers down my spine. Before I could gather my thoughts, she pulled the shirt over my head, leaving me bare and exposed to her gaze. My breath hitched, my mind spinning as I found myself caught in a whirlwind of emotions I couldn't begin to untangle. The conflict was real, but so was the magnetic pull of her touch and her kisses, which left me dizzy and craving more. With a deliberate yet gentle force, she pushed me back against the workbench, her lips moving to my neck, leaving a trail of warmth that sent my senses reeling. Her hands roamed over me with bold confidence, her touch both firm and tender, rendering me utterly powerless to resist. Every caress felt deliberate, as if she knew exactly how to unravel the defenses I didn't even realize I still had. It was intoxicating, overwhelming, and completely beyond anything I'd ever experienced. We've got plenty of time," she murmured, her breath warm against my lips before capturing them in another kiss, this one more urgent, more insistent. It was the kind of kiss that left no room for thought, only raw feeling. I didn't know how we had gotten to this point, how everything had escalated so quickly, but in that moment, none of it seemed to matter. All that existed was her and me. The rest of the world outside the garage, fading into nothingness as the tension between us reached a fever pitch, with every kiss, every electrifying touch. Her lips moved against mine, soft yet filled with a hunger that spoke of boundaries crossed, of an unspoken line shattered beyond repair. The garage, once a space of mundane familiarity, now felt like it was closing in around us, the air thick and charged with an intensity I could feel in my very bones. Her hands wandered across my chest with a deliberate exploring confidence, her fingers tracing each contour and muscle as if she had waited forever for this moment. Every touch left a trail of fire on my skin, a heat that only seemed to intensify with each passing second. The space between us seemed to disappear entirely, replaced by an irresistible magnetic pull that neither of us had the will, or perhaps the desire, to resist. It was as if the entire universe had funneled down to this singular moment. "Pamela," I murmured again, but this time my voice carried a certainty that hadn't been there before, a resolve that surprised even me. She lifted her gaze to meet mine, and in her eyes, I saw something new, something that made my breath catch, desire pure and unfiltered, as undeniable as the pull I felt toward her. She closed the distance between us, her body pressing firmly against mine, and I could feel her warmth radiating through the delicate fabric of her dress, a sensation that sent a shiver through me. Every touch of hers seemed to ignite something within me, a fire that made my pulse thunder in my chest. The soft brush of her skin against mine wasn't just physical. It was electric, sparking a craving I couldn't contain, a yearning that grew with every fleeting moment of contact. But it wasn't just about the closeness of our bodies. It was something deeper, an unspoken connection that had always been there simmering, waiting for a moment like this to come alive. It was as if we had been circling this uncharted territory for so long, and now there was no turning back, only the magnetic pull drawing us together. "I've seen the way you look at me," she whispered, her breath warm as her lips grazed my ear, sending a shiver down my spine. "Don't think I haven't noticed." Her words hung in the air, and I swallowed hard, my heartbeat thundering in my chest like a drum I couldn't quiet. She was right, and we both knew it. I had tried so hard to ignore those feelings, to push those thoughts into the farthest corners of my mind, but now there was no use pretending. The truth was undeniable. I had been drawn to her for months, maybe even since the very day she moved in, though I had never allowed myself to fully acknowledge it. Not until now, with her so close, her presence overwhelming my senses. Her hands moved lower with deliberate slowness, the warmth of her touch contrasting with the cool air as she began to peel off my shirt. My breath hitched as her fingers brushed against my skin, her movements unhurried, as if she wanted to savor every second of the moment. It felt like she was unwrapping something precious, a gift she had been longing for, her anticipation evident in every subtle motion, and perhaps in some unspoken way, she had been waiting for this just as much as I had. Each of us circling this inevitable moment, unable to resist any longer. "You don't need to hold back," she said softly, her lips brushing tantalizingly against my neck, sending delightful shivers racing down my spine. "I know you've wanted this just as much as I have." I found myself unable to speak, unable to think clearly. All I could do was instinctively react to the moment. My hands moved almost automatically to her waist, pulling her closer to me, feeling the warmth radiating from her body. She smiled at me, a satisfied and knowing smile as though she had been patiently waiting for this moment. Her hands tangled themselves in my hair, and she kissed me again, this time with a depth and passion that took my breath away. In that instant, the world outside the garage completely ceased to exist. It was just the two of us, completely absorbed in the moment and each other. Her dress slipped down her shoulders, revealing the smooth, flawless skin beneath, and I found myself utterly captivated by her, every single inch of her. She was much older than me, an age gap that should have made me hesitate, but instead, it only amplified the intensity of the moment. The sheer forbidden nature of what we were doing gnawed at the edges of my mind, reminding me over and over again that it was wrong. I knew it, deep down, but that knowledge did nothing to stop me. In fact, it seemed to push me further, making the pull between us even stronger. I didn't want to stop. I couldn't stop. She took my hand and guided me to the old worn-out couch tucked away in the corner of the garage. That couch had always been a place of solitude for me, a refuge where I'd sit when I needed to clear my thoughts. But tonight, it was transformed into something entirely different. Less a place for reflection, and more a stage for what felt like a forbidden performance. She lowered herself onto the couch, tugging me down beside her. Her eyes stayed locked on mine, unwavering, filled with something I couldn't quite name. Desire, certainty, or perhaps both. This stays between us, she whispered, her voice soft but firm, her lips hovering so close to mine I could feel her breath. "No one needs to know. It's just you and me, okay?" I nodded, words caught in my throat as my heart thundered in my chest. Slowly, I leaned in, unable to resist, and kissed her again. The feel of her lips against mine ignited something inside me, something that burned hotter with every second. Our bodies pressed together, and though I knew it was wrong, terribly wrong. It felt undeniably right in a way I couldn't explain. Each kiss, each touch, was like throwing another log onto an already raging fire. The more we gave in to the moment, the more impossible it became to imagine stopping. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as we stayed there, caught in each other's embrace, lost in the heat of it all. For what felt like hours, nothing else existed. The garage faded away, and so did every thought of my dad, of the consequences, of everything outside this moment. All that mattered was her body moving against mine, the soft way she whispered my name, the connection between us that drowned out the world. Ultimately, reality began to seep back in, unwelcome and sharp, slicing through the haze of the moment we had just shared. The faint but unmistakable sound of a car pulling into the driveway shattered the fragile bubble around us, and we sprang apart as if caught in the act. Our breaths came quick and shallow. Our breaths came quick and shallow, our bodies still trembling, echoing the intensity of what had just unfolded between us. "Your dad's home," she said, her voice low and breathless. She moved quickly, smoothing her dress with hurried hands, the movements brisk and efficient, as though erasing any trace of what had transpired. I fumbled to grab my shirt, yanking it over my head with shaking hands as my thoughts raced, colliding with each other with no resolution. Pamela turned to face me then, her expression now sobered and serious, though her eyes still held that undeniable spark, a flicker of something unspoken but potent. "Remember," she murmured, her tone firm yet soft, "no one can ever know about this." Her gaze locked onto mine, making sure I understood the weight of her words. I nodded silently, struggling to steady my breathing, still caught in the whirlwind of emotions and sensations. My mind was a storm, trying and failing to process everything that had happened, and what it meant. She moved toward the door leading into the house, but just before stepping through, she paused. Turning back to look at me, she smiled. A faint, knowing smile that sent another wave of shivers coursing through me. It was a smile that lingered in the air, heavy with secrets and promises, before she disappeared into the house, leaving me alone to grapple with the gravity of what we had just done. "We'll talk later," she murmured gently before disappearing inside, leaving me alone in the garage with my swirling thoughts and the lingering sensation of her touch. I lingered there briefly, my heart pounding, trying to grasp how everything had shifted so suddenly. Then, I perched on the side of the bed, the weight of her words pressing heavily on my chest. Nevertheless, just before Pamela could completely walk out the door, she paused for a brief moment. She stood there, her hand resting on the doorknob, as if she were engaged in an internal struggle with herself. Then, gradually, she turned back to face me, and I noticed her expression had softened significantly. Rather than the sense of finality I had felt just a moment ago, there was something different, something that felt hopeful and filled with possibility. "Listen," she began, her voice gentler now, carrying a softness that hadn't been there before. "I meant every word about this being complex. It's not easy, and I can't pretend it is, but that doesn't mean it was a mistake. It doesn't mean it was wrong. It's just, I wasn't prepared for this, for any of it, for feeling this way." Her words hung in the air, heavy with sincerity, as if she were still processing them herself. She stepped closer, the space between us shrinking as she sat down beside me on the bed. This time, she was closer, her presence warm and unguarded. "I've been wrestling with it too," she admitted, her voice quieter now, almost like a confession. "Trying to push it down, to ignore it, but it's been impossible." I turned to her, my eyes searching her face for answers, for clarity in the middle of the storm. "Then why does it have to end like this?" I asked, my voice tinged with frustration and a hint of pleading. She paused and offered a faint smile that seemed to carry the weight of hope and understanding. Her eyes softened, their twinkle lighter, more open. "Maybe it doesn't," she said, her tone just above a whisper, her words laced with possibility. "Maybe it's not about what can't happen or what's in the way. Maybe it's about finding out what we can make happen together, figuring this out instead of giving up." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Silence enveloped the room, not the uncomfortable kind, but the kind that felt full of meaning, as if the air between us was shifting. The tension that had gripped us so tightly before seemed to dissolve, replaced by something more genuine, more vulnerable. It was as if we had reached an unspoken understanding, a place where we could finally just be, together without fear or hesitation. Pamela extended out, her fingers brushing against mine before gently wrapping my hand in hers. "I don't want to lose this, whatever it is between us," she murmured, her voice carrying a mix of vulnerability and determination. "But we have to be careful. We need to take it slow. I don't want anyone to get hurt, especially not your dad. But at the same time, I can't pretend this didn't happen, and I don't want to—" Her words sparked something inside me, a glimmer of hope. Maybe this didn't have to be all or nothing. Maybe there was a way to navigate these emotions, to explore what we were feeling, without it unraveling everything else in our lives. "What do we do then?" I asked, my voice cautious but tinged with hope, as if her answer might offer a plan forward. She gave me that warm, reassuring smile, the one that always seemed to make everything feel less complicated. Squeezing my hand gently, she said, "We take it one step at a time. We don't rush into anything, and we don't ignore what's happening either. We figure it out together. But for now, we keep this just between us until we know for sure what we're doing and where we want this to go." Though it wasn't a flawless plan, it exceeded my expectations. There was no shame in it, no regret, just the fragile beginnings of something new. Something that held the potential to grow into whatever we chose to make of it. As she leaned in, her lips brushing against mine, it felt different this time. The kiss wasn't laced with urgency or guilt. Instead, it was soft and tender, filled with a quiet promise, a promise of a future neither of us had expected, but one we were both willing to discover together. Her eyes met mine with a silent passion as she drew back a little. Whispering, "We'll figure it out," she said. I realized then that she was correct. We had a chance to make this work, no matter how long it took, and more importantly, we had a connection. A lightness and a sense of possibility took the place of the heaviness I had experienced before. The room seemed a bit lighter when we sat side by side. Hope for what could happen next took the place of the burden of shame and concealment. This was only the start. That's the wrap-up of today's video. Thank you so much for watching. If you found our content engaging, a thumbs up and sharing it with your loved ones would be much appreciated. Make sure to subscribe to our channel, Love 30K Stories, and turn on the notification bell for updates on our latest videos. Your support is everything to us. Until next time, take care and goodbye.